Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, and welcome to the Lunar Governance Industry Perspective Fireside chat. I have the pleasure today to have with me Mike Gold, long colleagues of mine, is now the president of a civil and international project in Red Wires. I'm Giuseppe Reibaldi, the president of the MVA. So today we are going to discuss a number of topics which are, let's say, very important for industry, and this will be a very informal discussion. And so I think Mike can interrupt me, and I would have the pleasure to interrupt him. So I think important is that we give you the important element of this discussion. So Mike, again, thank you for being here with us. So I would like to start basically with the basic, if I like to say. So today is the International Moon Day. As you know, it's a very important event of the United Nations. So let's start with the basic. What is the importance, the strategic and the economic importance of the lunar exploration and utilization for industry, please?
Thank you, Giuseppe. And let me say, it's wonderful to be in Dubai, even if I'm just virtually in Dubai. That's already terrific. So thank you to the University of Dubai and our hosts and Moon Village Association for this opportunity. Relative to the strategic importance of the moon, we've all talked many times about helium-3. That talk has transitioned to actual companies that are beginning to look at helium-3 extraction. So we're seeing what was once an idea begin to transition to reality. And this could be extraordinary relative to the existing uses for medical procedures, for energy with helium-3. And obviously, if we're able to gather a sufficient amount of helium-3, what that could mean for clean energy, for the environment moving forward could be very important. Again, we go to the moon not just for discoveries, not just for science, but to make life on Earth even better. And if helium-3 does indeed hold promise for energy, that could be very important. Then there's rare earth elements, which we are running out of on Earth, and moving much of this excavation and construction to the moon rather than doing it on Earth not only benefits us in terms of the amounts that we can gather, but in avoiding harm to the planet in the first place. So I think there is a number of just critical benefits that will only become more important in the future.
Okay, right. So if I may, being a nuclear engineer, in the past, when people were telling me about the helium-3 as one of the major, let's say, topic of exploration of the moon, I was laughing my head off because basically, as we all know, the nuclear fusion reactor, they were in the feasibility study when I got my degree more than 50 years ago, and we are not very far. So hopefully, I learned that helium-3 is not basically only for future fuel of future let's say, fusion reactor, but is also for other applications. So maybe you should make clear, because as a nuclear engineer, as I said, fusion and helium-3 does not match. So maybe you can clarify that point, please.
Giuseppe, you look far too young to have gotten that degree 50 years ago.
Oh, well, that's what it is.
Hard to believe.
Yeah.
Oh, one of the great aspects and interesting opportunities with helium-3 is there's an existing market for it, that this doesn't have to be something prospective or something new to develop, that there is strong demand at relatively high prices for helium-3, again, for medical devices, for scientific study, and there's limited amounts of helium-3 that we're gathering on Earth. So the fact that this does not immediately need to be utilized for fusion power, I think, is good, while keeping fusion open as an opportunity. Now, I did not get a PhD in nuclear physics. I am a recovering attorney, as you know, so certainly I'm not qualified to speak to the possibility of helium-3 for fusion, but I can pay attention to the market and to development of companies And we have seen the number of companies dealing with helium-3, as I mentioned before, go from really no serious players to several players, some of which are attached to terrestrial extraction and resource companies, oil and gas companies. So that's great to see the interest. And I assume if serious companies, serious money, and existing oil and gas is interested, that someone with technical capability said this was a good idea.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. Now let's shift gear. We have been involved together many years ago in the Hague Space Resources Working Group. So the question is, how is basically the role of the NGO and the soft, so to speak, law, like the guidelines that we published for the Hague Space Resources, going to the Artemis, and then moving forward to the Global Expert Group on Sustainable Activity, the framework. Can you guide us? How did you see this evolution and some common elements, please?
Absolutely. If we go back to the Hague International Space Resources Governance Working Group, name rolls off the tongue, the initial work that we did there, and if memory serves, it was myself and I think Guoyo from China who were co-chairing the safety zone panel about safety zone working group, Tiger Team 2, I think it was. And the initial work that we did at The Hague found its way into the Artemis Accords, that much of what we did with safety zones in the Hague Working Group certainly at least helped inform what we were doing with safety zones in the Artemis Accords. So I think we've already seen a non-trivial impact by the NGO in the form of the Hague influence, what is now 55 nation signatories on the Artemis Accords. So we see the way that the Hague and NGOs in general can be a laboratory for experimentation, for discussion. That's an important precursor to governmental activities. And as you'll recall, at the time I was involved with The Hague, I was not at NASA. I was with Maxar Technologies. And one of the other advantages of The Hague, the GEGSLA, and NGOs in general is the ability of private sector entities and representatives to participate, whereas that is not necessarily the case at NUSA or in government entities.
Can you say a few words about also the Global Expert Group that MVA, making treasure of all these lessons learned, basically came forward together with a number of 40 people from different countries to the framework document? So maybe.
Sure thing. I think GEGSLA was unique. And again, this shows the advantages of the NGOs in that you did have government participants from Japan, from China, from United Arab Emirates, but also the private sector. Lockheed Martin was there. I was with Redwire at that time and participating on behalf of Redwire. iSpace was also there, again, along with Japanese officials. And so it's just unique, the diversity and variety of entities that you can get around the table. And as we all know, it's an absolute necessity to have private sector participation, since the private sector entities are largely now the organizations that are actually conducting the work and building the systems. The challenge for that, as you and I have encountered, is that the private sector often doesn't have the time, the resources, and the ability to engage in these policy discussions in NGO groups like the government, where they actually have a Department of State, they have a space agency with international relations to be able to work with them. So I'm hoping that maybe a solution to that is, at least in the United States, groups like Commercial Spaceflight Federation are trade associations that represent all of us participating more in the NGOs to ensure that the private sector has a voice in the room, but it doesn't become burdensome relative to the private sector entities and officials relative to time and money. But that is the challenge and an existential issue that we face, that the private sector needs to be in the room, but they don't have the money or the time to be there. So it's a difficult balancing act.
Well, absolutely. Well, actually, in fact, this was indeed my next question. You already answered the question. So I think maybe the solution you kind of indicated yourself is to kind of bring people together, organization together to form consortia that they can represent and then collect input and then report back to this. Because I mean, we as an NGO, as MVA, we can do as many platforms as we wish, as many consortia we wish, but if we don't get any feedback, clearly. And of course, it's important that you know the organized yearly conference where obviously industry is represented. However, unfortunately, these are one point in time. And what is needed is a platform which can really get feedback as move forward, like interoperability.
Absolutely. I will take it as an action. See, even when we're having a live discussion, I'm taking
Right.
actions
Right.
to talk to the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, which represents ourselves,
Yes.
SpaceX, Origin, iSpace,
Yes.
and they'd be perfect to engage in this kind of activity because there are very important discussions that are occurring. You mentioned interoperability, which is a vital principle of the Artemis Accords, not only for international collaboration, but for the private sector, that we need an environment on the moon as well as on Mars and beyond that is conducive to commercial development. And if we run into a AC/DC issue or VHS versus Betamax, and I'm old enough where I'm making VHS versus Betamax references, we need to make sure that interoperability is there, both to support private sector development and to save lives. That I believe eventually the fact that we have strong interoperability will enhance safety and save human life on the moon and Mars. And since the private sector is building the hardware, we are uniquely, if not singularly, suited to be able to tackle that issue.
Well, so I take on your word that I think from now on, hopefully, there will be some kind of representation on a permanent basis, not just at conference every year.
Inshallah,
Yeah,
inshallah.
inshallah. Okay, last question, because then we have to close, is of course, Artemis is a major program with, as you said yourself, 55 countries. However, there is another side, which is called ILRS, which is also important. So how do you see the cooperation of these two programs? So I think, how do you see those two cooperating between each other?
As I mentioned, I'm a recovering attorney, and therefore I believe in the power of precedent. And I hope everyone signs the Artemis Accords. I think that the principles, and obviously I'm a bit biased, having served as an architect of the Accords, but I think the principles are universal, they're common sense. So I would encourage every country to sign the Artemis Accords. For those that don't, though, I think that we're still establishing a precedent by showing what good looks like, by releasing scientific information, by being transparent, by supporting resource extraction, by dealing with the debris issue. I think that still has influence even on those that have not signed the Artemis Accords, which I hope everyone will. And I think when it comes to at least space policy, that there's a great deal of commonality between what we see in ILRS and what we see with the Accords. I think it would be very interesting to see a policy document like the Accords from ILRS and be able to identify what that common ground is for the benefit of all countries.
Okay, all right. I think we are now at the end of our time. So I like, of course, to thank you, Mike. It's been a pleasure to have you here. And I think I think there is going to be later on a panel about lunar governance. So I'm sure they will take into account those important discussions. Again, thank you so much, Mike, for having participated in this fireside chat. And I wish you all the best. And we're looking forward to a bigger industry participation in all the platform that we as an NGO, we are trying to set up.
Thank you. Shukran.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you.